Hi everyone, I'm Cal Spriggs. Today I'm going to show you the third part of my Desert Outpost build. Now this was a really big project. If you haven't gone back and watched parts 1 and 2, I highly recommend doing that. But here in part 3, I finally get to slap some paint on this thing and finish it up. In part 1 and 2 of this series, I assembled this Desert Outpost. And in this episode, I get the opportunity to finally put some paint on it. So I started off with a mix of Mod Podge and black paint. You can see me mixing up some more of it there. I didn't like the consistency I had. It was a little too runny. And very simple step. I mixed in some black craft paint along with some Mod Podge, and I just started painting it. The important thing with this was getting it on everything, especially all the foam. The Mod Podge really reinforces the foam and makes it sturdier. It also helps a lot with some of the thinner chipboard and cardboard. So getting it on everything is really important. It's also great for having a base layer so that the other paint will stick and locking in a lot of the basing material. And you can see on the base of this thing, I put a lot of sand and gravel and small rocks and stuff to give it that desert texture. And the Mod Podge does a great job of locking that all down and making sure it's not going to move anywhere. I do play with my terrain. I don't just put it on a shelf. It's not for display purposes. So I want everything to be solid and to hold up well to gaming. This is not a quick process. And I think I said before in my second video, looking back, maybe I should have put this first coat of Mod Podge and maybe even painted the entire rock formation first before I assembled the walkways and gantries and stuff. It was pretty difficult reaching in some of the spots, especially underneath the walkways and behind that parapet, in between the parapet and the wall, that kind of thing. Trying to get in there, trying to get every spot of it. It took a lot of attention to detail. I had a couple different brushes. I had this big brush for getting the big wide spaces, and then I had a smaller brush, which you can see in the water cup there, that I used for trying to get as much of the tiny little nooks and crannies of this thing as I could. While I was doing this, it was neat to see all those details, the striations that I'd cut into the rock face, all of the textured gravel and stuff on the base, as well as the little patches here and there that I'd put throughout, all kind of took shape, and the paint helped it stand out from being a homogeneous pale blue chunk of foam with stuff stuck onto it to one single piece of terrain. And that was really neat for me. You can see me here trying to get the tiny details. Getting the foam surface there behind that ladder was a real pain. Not just here when I was trying to put on the Mod Podge to protect it, but also later on when I was trying to do the dry brushing and overbrushing especially. It was extremely annoying trying to paint those details. So in the future, I would definitely do that different way. I'd probably put the ladder on later. But for now, I worked around it. It was workable. It was just, like I said, a little bit of a pain. I painted Mod Podge with that black paint in it in that doorway there as well. It did a really good job of making it look like it was opening up on this deeper space somewhere inside that outcropping, so I like how that came out. And that really ties into an element of building terrain that I definitely think I need to touch on. It's, you want to have some kind of story, some reason why people are fighting here. I see a lot of crafting videos where people just have ruined cities and all that, but if you can only have so many ruined buildings and so many generic objects to fight over, if there's no story, if there's no meaning to the fight, then why are your little toy soldiers fighting there? And I think that's an element that they really lost in a lot of wargaming. You look at what 9th edition 40k was, and it was a very generic, very same. You're fighting over these objective markers that it doesn't matter what they are. They're just these markers. And it was great from a purely competitive standpoint, but from a narrative standpoint, it really just every game felt kind of the same. So when I play, I like to have a terrain that has some kind of story behind it, some kind of history to it, something that has meaning. and B, I like to play games that they're fought over and against a history and background of reasons to fight, so culture and politics and all the rest that give people a reason to be risking their lives in combat. But I've gone a little bit away from the topic at hand. So going around with the Mod Podge, as you can see, I'd pretty much got the whole cliff face. I was getting the finer details, Mod Podging the bunker and the walkways and the stairs. I really like how well this sealed everything together afterwards. It was already pretty solid between the tacky glue and the hot glue gun I used and all the rest. But the Mod Podge, like I said before, it seals everything really well. You can see here I really kind of struggled again getting in those nooks and crannies, getting those finer details. I used the bigger brush where I could just because there was so much surface area I needed to coat. But I had that smaller brush and I used that too. All the same, if I had tried to paint this rock face first and then come back and added the details, I was concerned it wouldn't all sit properly. It wouldn't all be as strong. And also I wasn't sure that, I could get everything I wanted on the catwalks and bunker and everything painted. So I'm not sure whether I chose the best route or not, but it certainly was a bit of a pain there getting it painted there at the end. I was definitely lagging as well. I got this on 16 times speed for y'all. For me, it was a bit of a beast to get it all done. I went through quite a bit of Mod Podge, quite a bit of paint. I think I mixed up like 3 or 4 batches on this thing. But thanks to the power of editing, here we are, complete for y'all. So once I had the Mod Podge on, I let it all dry and cure. I think it was the next day when I came back. And I used burnt umber craft paint to start painting out the metallic details on this. Now, I like the way that this came out. I actually got the idea, I think, from Eric's Hobby Workshop. Fantastic channel if you're not watching that. It's really great. And I just went in with my crafting brush and painted all the metallic details with this color. It's supposed to replicate sort of a rusty metal look, and it does a really good job. And with that, I just took my time, went along, picked out all the objects that are supposed to be metal, so the door, the little bit of sheet metal that I put in front of it to act as a platform, and then all the catways, walkways, and that sort of thing. The stairs were a bit of a pain to actually paint with this stuff because my brush was bigger than the stairs were, so getting the detail in there was hard, and making sure I had all the spots was hard. But I also didn't want to get out one of my detail brushes to paint every single step. So there was a lot of slapping it on. This is a big item. It's a big piece of terrain. So at the end of the day, most of the time people aren't looking to make sure you've painted underneath every single step. But I did my best. And then also I knew I was going to come back and hit the rock with Barn Red. So I wasn't too concerned if I had a little bit of spillage. And you can actually see me start on the Barn Red because I realized I'd be going over most of the rock face with the red, and I didn't want to be halfway done with the burnt umber and paint over something and then have to come back and repaint it. So I got out the Barn Red and started painting on the entire rock face surface everywhere. Really wanted to be sure I got this in the cracks and crannies amongst the striations everywhere I could, because this is the base coat, right? This is what should be showing underneath all the overbrushing and dry brushing I was going to do later. And at first it looked very kind of bright, but it darkened a little bit to that red sandstone that I was looking for anyway. So yeah, I just went around the entire model, slapping the Barn Red on. It went pretty quickly. I painted side to side. It's pretty easy to notice that I was doing so where I could anyway. And that helped kind of accentuate the paint the way I was painting with the brush, the bristles and everything would further accentuate the striations that I'd cut into the rock, and it also kind of pulled the whole piece together a bit, and it made sure I got it inside all those cracks and everything. Painting this red around the man-made objects on there, it was a pain. I know I've said it before, but there's probably got to be a better compromise. Maybe I should have assembled just parts of it before I glued it all together, but lesson learned for next time I tackle a big project like this. It was really neat seeing this red kind of helped me differentiate, coming out of that black, helped me differentiate color palette wise where the man-made pieces were versus the human technology and human elements of it. There for a moment I was really tempted to do the column for that parapet as a red as well, because in my back of my head I was thinking about tinted concretes and the fact that if you use sand from a local area, the concrete, when you make the concrete will adopt that similar color. I decided against it because I want this to look like it's set apart, like it stands out, and it's meant to stand out. So I decided later on to go with a pewter gray, and you'll see that. But it was kind of a neat thought. I was thinking about the history of the place and thinking about whether they imported the concrete they used or built it there, and decided to go with its imported concrete. It's a little detail that most people wouldn't care about, but like I said, I'm trying to tell a story with this place about what's happened here and who lives here. So having those details set in my head allowed me to develop a more consistent palette and more consistent object of terrain. I had not put any railings on this thing, and thankfully it made painting it a lot easier. But I also was of the opinion that you've got this armored parapet up there, and then the rest of it's kind of open, so it's not primarily a military outpost. It might be used by raiders or scavengers or whoever, but it's not armored or equipped with a ton of weapons. There's no turrets and everything everywhere. It's definitely not an orc rock or anything like that. It's an outpost. It's meant to, be out there in the middle of the desert for whatever mysterious purpose, but it's not a military formation. Getting the red on went pretty well. You can see I'm using my trusty 8.5 inch or 8.5 by 11 inch piece of paper there to try and keep as much of this craft paint off my cutting mat as possible. I managed to make kind of a neat Jackson Pollock-esque painting there on the bottom as I did multiple layers of this craft paint. And you can see me with the smaller craft brush trying to get in those nooks and crannies, trying to get all the little areas. At first I was trying really hard not to get it on the burnt umber stuff I'd already painted, and I kind of gave up on that and said, you know what, I'll paint over it. It's fine. That's why I went to painting this barn red anyway, because I knew it would end up going over a lot of the stuff. It's a big project. It took me, I want to say a solid hour and a half to paint this whole thing. Getting all the little spots on it. There's definitely project fatigue, and I'm really glad I didn't use my Citadel paints for it, because I would have used up a whole pot of it or so. This barn red, though, you can see on the one side it does darken quite a bit from initially painting it on, so I like how that darkened, how it looked, and then when I hit it again with the overbrushing and dry brushing, it really makes the contrast between the desert sand and the red sandstone, just gives it this vibrancy and natural look that I liked. And I'm just kind of going through now and touching up. It was hard to actually find a spot I could hold this thing while I was painting it. It's big and it's heavy, but still, as I was slapping paint on it, it took a lot of it moved around a lot under me as I was trying to paint it. So I had to hold on to it, especially painting with that larger crafting brush. It had very stiff bristles. I was not really all that pleased with that crafting brush. I got it at a dollar store. I suppose I got what I paid for. And then after I'd gotten the red on all the sides, I finally decided to paint the top. That was the spot I'd been using to kind of brace it while I painted. So I finished up the sides, got in all those little tiny areas around the door and under the gantries and catwalks and stuff. And with all that done, I got to move on to the fun part of starting the dry brushing. So I used this khaki color craft paint that I thought matched the desert look that I wanted. It's the same one I used for my other desert rock outcroppings, and I went in with a pretty heavy dry brush, overbrush, whatever you want to call it, and really got it everywhere, trying to leave the natural red that I had, that barn red in the deeper cracks and crevices and showing through in areas. And I put this everywhere. I put it on the sides, I put it on the base, everywhere that was rock. I wasn't too particular about getting a little bit of this on the metallic areas because it looks like dust or sand anyway, so it'll kind of help those areas fit in a little bit. I had gone through, and you can see that I got the rest of the metal painted that burnt umber color, so that's all ready to go as well. So, yep, I went around. Dry brushing went relatively quick compared to everything else. The only areas I had problems with really were behind the parapet and under that ladder, which, again, definitely if I do anything like this in the future, I'll glue that on later after doing this part. And went around the whole thing, having some kind of lazy Susan or something would help as I went around, making sure I got everywhere and bracing it as I painted. And I didn't sweat having a little too much paint on the brush at times. This is fine. I was going to hit all this with a brown wash anyway at the end of it, so that those areas where I got a little bit too much paint on it, it worked out pretty well. So another important piece of this is making sure that it matched the board that I had, the playmat that I had. And it does. It's close enough color that it really doesn't seem out of place at all. And the deeper red actually really helps kind of make it pop and separate it out of the desert as something that is, ancient and different. So, which is exactly what I was going for. So that's good. As far as getting the whole thing covered, I just tried to work my way from one end to the other. I missed a couple areas there on that backside, and I came back and got those dry brushed and overbrushed the top, all the ledges. It was pretty easy to do. This part was great because I got to see how everything was going to look. At this point, I kind of knew what it was going to look like, and on the top I tried to kind of stipple that on a little bit. I didn't want a sort of uniform texture, whereas over on the ramp I tried to dry brush all in one direction because I wanted it to look like the ramp had been worn down that way. Whereas up on the top I kind of stippled it a bit more so that it looked more natural, less human engineered and such. So, but you can see the edges, they got a bit heavier of the dry brushing, which is fine. That acts as a nice highlight for them. And really this just made all the texture pop, all those striations, everything. It started looking like what I wanted it to look like, and I was really happy with it. And you can see me again fighting with that stupid ladder. I do that most of the video, I think. I spent more time fighting with that ladder and trying to paint behind it than I spent on a lot of the rest of this thing. So, and I did leave the inside of that entrance, as you can see, black. It makes it look like there's a deeper cavern in there and deeper opening in there, and I like that. I had thought about putting a door on it and decided against it. So here's me going with the sunlight yellow as a final dry brush highlight, and it looks kind of subtle. In some areas I went a bit heavier with it, but I was basically just trying to get those highlights, get those edges to give it that kind of yellowed sand look, so that it really stands out from the darker red of the sandstone. With this, I was going, as you can see, against the grain of the striations, so it made those stand out starker, made the dark red in the recesses stand out against the yellow. I tried to hit it a little harder on the edges of these corners of the rock formation, so to represent, sunlight hitting that area, those areas, and kind of glinting off of them a little bit stronger. Don't know if it really showed up much after the wash, but I think the yellow really does add to the whole piece. If I'd done it with just khaki, I think it would have been fine, but I think the yellow in general just kind of helps make everything pop, especially down on the sand texture I'd done on the base. So, I put a little bit more on the top and on those ledges to represent, again, the sun is going to hit there, and it's going to light that area up a bit more than down along the sides of it, the flatter sides and stuff. And it did a really good job of kind of showing the light and creating that lighting, because on natural rock formations and the natural world, you do have those lighting effects, whereas on models like this you don't. So you got to kind of artistically try and bring those out and trick the human eye so that there's a sense of scale and perspective that you wouldn't otherwise get. But stippled the last little bit of this on different areas. Really tried to bring out those flatter surfaces, make those a bit brighter, and tried to make sure I had the whole thing the way I wanted it. Again, with the yellow, I didn't really sweat getting some of the yellow dry brushed onto the metal surfaces, because I came over those later anyway. Here with the concrete, I did the pewter. I wanted it to look like a more industrial style concrete, a harsher look. I did the same over on the bunker with this pewter gray. Came out looking really good. I almost didn't want to put any of the wash on it, but at the same time, I wanted to show the kind of greasy, nasty dust that you'd find in like Necromunda or something. It sticks to everything. Having been to the Middle East, that moon dust stuff that you get, it clings to everything, and no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing, you find that stuff everywhere. So I wanted to, while I wanted to leave these so that they looked, sharp and everything, I also wanted to tie the whole piece together, and I wanted to make it look more ancient and worn down than the sharp, crisp look that pewter gray gave to it. Coming back through, this is where I started dry brushing the metal. I just used a cheap silver that I got at the dollar store, I think. And with this, I just kind of stippled it on those flat surfaces from the CD. I really had to kind of work to avoid getting any kind of pattern, but on everything else, I stippled it on. It went on great. Had no issues. Used the largest brush I had, large craft brush I had. And got it everywhere. I didn't worry too much about getting a little bit here and there on the rock face. And when I hit the bunker, I really liked how it looked. It really finally came together and changed from kind of this thing to a bunker door. And I liked how that changed. Getting that little door up on the top was actually kind of hard. For whatever reason, the paint just didn't want to stick to it. It was kind of frustrating, but. And then I went back through on that parapet and just made sure it looked good. So here I am doing the final wash. I got this brown wash everywhere. You can see I'm using a couple sheets of paper on underneath, because the craft paint and everything. I ended up with my like I said before, Jackson Pollock style painting there underneath the base, and I didn't want to ruin my cutting mat. But I went with a heavy brown wash over everything. This is a brown wash I made from a recipe that Black Magic Craft shared, so definitely recommend checking his site out. But it's just a simple brown wash, and I put it all over everything. I stained the metal, stained the concrete, and it pulled it all together and made it look like this thing has been sitting out in the desert for untold centuries. And I got exactly what I wanted out of it. So now with this, I did come back to make sure that it didn't pool too much in different areas. Here's a quick reminder to like and subscribe. I have a lot more content coming, and here's the final product. I ended up with my Wasteland Outpost. It's a good scale. I can park vehicles on that ramp. I plan on building a couple other things like a crane and stuff for later on. On the back side, you've got the catwalk, the bunker, and all the rest. So all in all, it looks great. It ties in with my other desert terrain, fits my playmat, and I'm really excited to be able to get some models on it. Thanks for watching.